been operating the live stream with YouTube. So I don't know if that's something that you want to do also, Antonio. That's more for the IOTA community.
It has already
Um,
started, so it's all
Already
good.
started. Perfect. Okay, so then I think we just kick it over to Themes, and she will introduce herself and share her screen and offer the presentation.
Cool. So for the free flowing of the presentation, Punkar will actually be sharing his screen so I could focus on presenting. So thank you so much, Punkar. My name is Themes. I am a governance advisor and associate at Bankless Consulting. And today I'll be covering the Cardano project catalyst for you. And so I just want to click on the stream to make sure that you are. And just learning from last time, if the screen doesn't move, please tell me as soon as possible. That'd be really helpful for the flow of the presentation. Thank you so much. So the Cardano Project Catalyst is a series of innovation funds that leverages the collective intelligence of the Catalyst community to determine the future direction and development of the Cardano ecosystem. So basically, the way that it worked before it was that the governing treasury was governed by the Cardano partners of IOHK and Emergo. But Cardano wanted to develop a way in which it could fund community-led initiatives, but also provide an opportunity for the community to participate and increase engagement within the governance and collective decision-making process. Next slide, please. It has 4 key principles. So fair voting process, so developing a decentralized voting mechanism, usability, people who register to vote will be eligible for rewards, provide rewards for people who participate in the process, and innovation, and develop an innovation process to allow incubation and collaboration. Project Catalyst goals, next slide, please. Are to prepare a group of people who will be willing to and able to make contributions to the ecosystem, accelerate the developer and the app ecosystem to help them grow and evolve, and turn Cardano into an open source project. Next slide, please. So before I'm not sure if for everybody, but it seems to be flashing for me. Is the presentation still stable for everyone? Okay, perfect. And so I also wanted to get into the why. So the why is that they believe that through this process it would allow much more agility for distributed research development, empowering the community through collaboration and resulting in building things that are better, faster, cheaper than the top-down organizations. They also believe that through this route, they will be able to develop and enhance more decentralized team building, and believe that their most impactful projects come from teams who met while becoming part of the Project Catalyst. So this is also an opportunity for community unity. And through these processes, which I will describe later on, group refinement and execution. So what they've also found from their analysis of the other past challenges is that there has been significant improvement in the quality of proposals after the community weighs in with their constructive criticism. Now in regards to the players. So the key stakeholders in the grants program is the proposer, the person who submits the proposals to get funding, a community advisor who reviews the proposals and are trying to get funding in Project Catalyst, and the voters who have to have a minimum of 500 ADA in their wallets to vote on proposals. So I'll dive deep a little bit in regards to exactly the roles of each. So with the proposers, as I had mentioned before, also please let me know if I go too fast. With the proposers, as I mentioned before, are the ones who would be submitting their ideas based on the themes of the challenges. So each challenge, which is the fund, will have a specific criteria, but also themes in which you can apply for, which I will describe examples later on. Anyone can submit a proposal to get funding, and proposals must be targeted to solve the problems outlined by given funding challenge, as I mentioned before. So how people actually submit proposals is on the Cardano Idea Scale, which is a platform in which people could submit proposals and also get feedback as well. The funding rounds actually usually happen every 6 weeks. And the most effective proposals they have found were the ones that were able to address specific challenges given for the funding round, but also meet the requirements of the checklist that was provided, and also get more feedback from the community. Now, the community advisor role is actually quite important. Anyone can become a community advisor, and their expertise in the field is helpful but not required. They would also receive a checklist as well to ensure that whatever they're voting on would have reasoning behind why they had scaled it in a specific way. Scoring mechanisms, again, I will come back to later on. Now, anybody can become an advisor. You just sign up to become one by going onto the Cardano Idea Scale to register before each round. And the timeline for the work would be every 12 weeks, and will provide a 7-day window for community advisors to review, called the assess proposal phase. And this will then be followed by a 5-day review of the reviewers phase carried out by veteran community advisors. Now, veteran community advisors.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So when you have the community advisors review a proposal,
Sure.
how is that done? Like, what does that process look like? Like, how do they get it? Is it done on, like, is the proposal submitted through a discourse where?
So the proposal was submitted on Idea Scale, which is the platform. So kind of think of it like a platform like Discourse. So, but you'd actually sign in. And so the way that would happen is that the proposer will sign in to the Idea Scale. And then in the back end would fill out all of the information necessary in the application and then hit submit. The community advisor would then log in to Idea Scale to review the proposals that, thank you for sharing, yeah, Idea Scale, that, and I'll also share the link as well, that the proposals that they would have to review. From that, after the community advisors review their proposals, there needs to be a checks and balances, because as I mentioned before, in order to be a community advisor, there's no like stringent criteria. But what they've also recognized is that community advisors cannot also be the same people who are submitting proposals for obvious reasons, right? And so for that particular round, you can't submit a proposal and also be a community advisor. Now, the checks and balances behind the community advisor is by having a second reviewer, which is called a veteran reviewer, or veteran community advisor. And so the veteran community advisor was somebody that has already gone through the process of becoming a community advisor, who will then check the community advisor's feedback and assessment in order to ensure that everything has been like met on accord. Any other questions in regards to that?
Thank you. That was great.
Cool. Also, feel free not to have to wait till the end to ask me any questions. You can just stop me and ask as well. I'm pretty agile. Where is I? Okay, cool. And then in regards to the voter, as I mentioned before, you'd have to have a minimum of 500 ADA. Now, Cardano's actually built an app in which you would have to, in which you can actually vote for them. And so voters can either upvote or downvote a proposal. And what's also interesting is that voters can change their decisions before the voting time closes. So if they like supported or upvoted a particular proposal, and then a few days later change their minds, they can change their decision as well. And they're all registered by their wallet address. So that's how they're identified. How, in fact, you can prevent multiple people submitting or voting for the same proposal on multiple wallets, that has not been mitigated yet. Any other questions before I? Cool.
Why do voters require cap like 500? What was the determination, and also possibly when was the determination made that it was 500 ADA? Like at what price point?
Yeah, so I hadn't really found the exact reasoning about why you needed 500 ADA, but my assumption is that it was that you needed skin in the game. And so possibly is that they had a minimum threshold for people to participate, but one that would allow much more individuals to participate, but also kind of confirm that these people were part of the community or bought into the community. Questions? Okay, Punker, mind changing the slide, please? Three phases within the funding process. So there's the innovation phase. And then there is where community members would ideate, submit proposals, get feedback from community in general to refine the proposals and finalize them before they are assessed by the community advisor. After they're assessed by the community advisor, they are then sent to the veteran community advisor to review, to publish for voting. After that is the governance phase, so the collective decision-making part. And then once a proposal has been approved by the veteran community advisor, it is then registered to be voted on. And then after that, the proposal is then added to Snapshot and a community vote is being made, and then the vote is being tallied. Once successful applicants have been chosen, the funds are rewarded to those projects, and then those projects are then required to be to send in further reportings to ensure that they've met their milestone. Next slide, please. So speaking of reporting, so the project measurements and accountability. So once a project is funded, the successful applicants would have to submit their reporting every 2 weeks, an on-chain and in a new user survey. And their KPIs would be the growth metrics and additional KPIs set by individuals and teams in implementing the ideas. Now, the money is given in small increments in order to ensure that the teams are meeting their milestone goals and deliverables in regards to the proposals that have been approved. And any suspicious foul play will lead to a freeze in funding. And if the implementer runs out of the budget and cannot deliver, they will have to make another proposal. So they do have that opportunity to request for more funds, but would have to go through the same process as before. The screen is black for me. I just want to make sure that everybody else can see their screen. Okay, perfect. Then it must be me. So a little bit of stats. So to date, there has been 12.8 million ADA distributed to about 581 projects from over 91 countries. Next slide, please. Now, the funding history is quite interesting. Now, why it starts at Fund 2 is because Fund 0 and Fund 1 were more about testing the experience. So Fund 0 was actually using a focus group made up of from IOG team members to assess whether or not this process could actually work. And then Fund 1, the idea was introduced to the Cardano community and recruited 50 volunteers to help them develop the platform and process. So Fund 0 and Fund 1 didn't actually have any real funding for the project. And so Fund 2 began at 250K, Fund 3, 500K, Fund 4, 1 million, Fund 5, 2 million, Fund 6, 4 million, and Fund 7, 8 million, and Fund 8, 16 million. So as you see that it would increase, the fund actually began, Fund 2 began in September 2020, and it used to be deployed every 12 weeks, but now funds are deployed every 6 weeks. Cardano is currently on its Fund 9, but I'll be sharing the examples and some stats from Fund 7 because Fund 8's information isn't quite ready yet. Next
This
slide.
might be a stupid question, but those numbers were
Sure.
in ADA, right? They were in
Yes,
Cardano.
that's correct.
Okay.
That is correct. They're an ADA. Other questions?
Thank you.
No problem. Oh, sorry. Punko, there's a slide before. There we go. So if you're just curious about in regards to what the fund challenges examples. Now, these aren't the full length of examples, but these are the ones that have been the most consistent from Fund 7 to Fund 8. Others, of course, also included region-specific ones and community-centric ones as well. But the key ones that have kind of made it into the majority of the funds were challenges that accelerate decentralized identity, gaps in integration, Cardano scaling solutions, boosting Cardano's DeFi, business solutions, community advisor improvements, and community events. And these would range depending on the particular type of fund. So you'd have funds that were looking at funding like events, or you could look at funds that were looking at improving the community advisor process. So there's quite a large scale of the types of funds that were granted. I hadn't found a specific set amount that one can apply for, so there wasn't a specific range like 10,000 or 20,000 or 1 million. There was just an allotted amount that was being able to be distributed per fund, and then from that, people would just apply. Next slide, please. So the stats from Fund 7. So the projects that have been approved for funding was 269. 900 proposals have been reviewed by community advisors. 52,500 unique wallets had been voting, and there has been a 30% growth since the last funding round. With the catalyst, it's actually grown each round exponentially. So from Fund 2 to Fund 7, there has been an exponential growth in engagement within the community within this particular program. Although they've noticed some gaps and have implemented some changings towards that. Next slide, please. That they have implemented, and the reasoning behind it was to promote growth and learning over time while rewarding expertise and good faith participation. New initiatives included for Fund 8, starting from Fund 8, a database to track community advisors and veteran advisors' activities over time, additional requirements for veteran community advisors to participate and earn rewards, and automatic filtering of assessment and pre-QAs, reducing workload and improving focus. And that is the end of the visual presentation for the Cardano Catalyst project. Now I'm opening the floor to any questions.
Sorry, this is Andy again. So the rewards for veterans, so you get, what is the benefit?
Yeah, so the community advisors are actually receiving an incentive. So as a whole, community advisors, so veterans as well. And now with veterans, it's twofold outside of just monetary incentives. So what that does is that it also increases your reputation within the community. What that also says is that you have gone through this process that is incredibly important and would like to go through it again, but in a higher social capital. So social capital is one of them. Reputation is another, and then impact to community is the third, as well as actual incentives. So to be a community advisor, a total of 5% of the challenge fund amount is allocated as an incentive to community advisors. 4% will be allocated as rewards for reviewers, and 1% is allocated to incentivize those reviewing the reviews.
So does that mean that that the submitters, once they get approved, basically have 10% off the top that goes to pay off the reviewing system.
10% off the top of the total fund distributed? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I'm
There's
trying
a
to figure
budget
out.
for the fund, right? So
I'm
there's a
trying to
budget
figure
for
out
the fund.
how does it? How do they like? Let's say I submit a proposal, and let's say Ben is the community advisor, and Deep Sea is the veteran community advisor. I submit a proposal, and it gets approved, and the distribution is 1,000. Does that mean that Deep Sea gets four? Like, I'm trying to figure out how it gets distributed and where.
So it's from the total fund and not from the amount that you're asking for. So if you're like asking for 1,000, 4% of that 1,000 doesn't go to the community advisor. There's a specific amount from each fund that is held for incentives for the process.
Okay, that makes sense. I thought it would be like something where like somebody proposes something for like 2 million, and then everybody jumps on board to become a community advisor to get their piece of that pie.
Yeah, no, that would be great. But I also think they've also assessed that, you know, by incentivizing people monetarily has increased engagement. But yes, by making it from the fund, it prevents people from just jumping onto the larger proposals to get a bigger piece of the pie.
Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, so the exact amount of community advisors per fund, I don't have that number for you, but can follow up in regards to that. But it is quite a large amount of numbers because the last funding round had almost over 100 applications that were approved. So it is quite a large amount of people, but the incentivization is actually quite high. So there hasn't been really any lag in regards to finding community advisors to do those particular jobs. Sorry, did you cut off or is that just me? Okay, that's okay. Um, in regards to the community advisors, if it goes to a community vote.
And I mean, I can imagine that with 100 projects as a community member, it might become overwhelming to understand those and to vote on those. So, are there any kind of processes in place to support community members in voting? Are there some kind of presentations? Are there some kind of open doors days or AMAs or whatever to help decision making in that regards?
Yeah, okay. So one, I'm going to answer the question in two parts. So community advisors are actually the ones that streamline the process and make it easier for voters to make much more informed decisions because they are the first stop before a proposal goes out for a snapshot vote. And basically what they do is that they So community advisors, proposers, veteran community advisors all receive extensive resources, whether it's checklists or videos or information, a landing page that's on the Cardano Catalyst website to tell you exactly what you'd be doing. There's also a very clear scoring criteria which would assist community advisors in streamlining their work as well. So they would have to vote for each section between 1 to 5 and describe why on the categories of impact, feasibility, and auditability as well. And so what that ends up happening is after it's gone through the advisory process, then it is sent to the voters to then decide and assess whether or not this is actually a feasible project. And so as you know too, is that when reading specific proposals, a lot of things are missing. And so what ends up happening is that these large discussions end up happening because there's a lack of information originally posted. So a lot of voters aren't able to make informed decisions. There are incentives for voters. The exact percentage or amount that voters receive for voting is not, I haven't been able to find, but I do know that there's an incentives. Also, town halls for the challenges are streamed on YouTube. So on the Cardano Catalyst YouTube channel. And from there, proposers, community advisors, and voters are actually able to listen not only to the pitches, but they do hold like information sessions in which they would describe their learnings. So the other day, I was actually just watching one of the different ways that the community advisors had made any shifts and the learnings that they've had as well through that process. So there are a lot of resources and a lot of community engagement. Also, if people have questions in regards to the proposals that they're submitting or on the project, they have a quite active Telegram group in which you can ask questions and then people will be able to answer that for you. Did I answer the question? Perfect. Any other questions?
So actually, I might have a question. We were discussing, I think it was the AVE presentation, like kind of the legal structure and the IP around those kind of grants. Is there any consideration from Cardano on this, like on IP or how it's legally structured?
Yeah, so the intellectual property is defined by the proposer in the proposal. Now, because the legal position of IOK is that there is no legal entity behind the treasury, they can't really enforce any or own any IP.
Okay, so it's really like open source, community driven kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and this is why they call it an experiment. So it's not just the purpose of like.
So there's no legal structure behind. There's
Andy, let her finish.
Sorry, 1 second. I will answer that question. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. There's no legal structure behind Cardano. It's just that they can't enforce any IP. They can't own your IP and enforce it because the treasury in itself, there is no legal entity behind the specific treasury. So like when you submit your proposal and get it funded by the community, Cardano cannot own your IP. Your IP is also defined by the person submitting the proposal. The purpose of this is really an experiment to see whether or not collective and decentralized like research and collaboration can work on a community to develop products that are best for that ecosystem, that are cheaper, that are faster, and that last longer. So the benefits in that outweigh ones in whether holding that IP for funding a particular grant.
So, but in the sense, and I kind of like this, and I've thought about this. So a proposer can certainly put in their proposal, I want to give either the whole IP or 20% return back to the Cardano treasury. And now, yes, it cannot be enforced, but certainly those voting for it, that is something to think of. And then, as you said, a lot of this is built on reputation. If that proposer develops a big reputation and is showing multiple projects and funding back to the Treasury, then of course they're going to have more support in future. So though the entity can't enforce it, it's sort of the social decentralized infrastructure that organically at least supports a higher reputation. So if someone does say they're going to give IP or return funds back to the Treasury, then it's on them to come through and show that they actually do that. That kind of be kind of correct to assume?
Yeah. So
Nice.
it's dependent on them, right? So like if
Right.
they're like, and then the thing is that, so there's two things, right? So one is the IP and the other one is that I promise that any revenue generated from this will go to the Treasury. So like one, that could be a deciding factor, not for the proposal to be approved because maybe you'll not have enough information for it to go to be approved through the community advisor process. But let's say it is approved and then they say, hey, I am willing to give 10% of any future revenue back to the IOTA Treasury. If they don't do that, then of course their reputation will be impacted because that could have been the deciding factor for people to vote on that particular project. If they would like to give parts of their IP and make it open source, yeah, they are free to do so. And if they don't meet those requirements and keep it close, then of course their reputation in general will be impacted and could impact future funding, like receivable from this particular project or the Cardano ecosystem in general.
Nice. And when the Treasury does approve a proposal and funds that proposal, are they issuing Cardano tokens or like USDT or US or like euros, or is there any requirement that the project has to then take those tokens and convert them to fiat?
Yeah, it's an ADA.
It's an
So
ADA.
all funds are distributed in ADA.
Have you
sense,
found
right?
it? Well, especially when it's
Makes
not a
sense for
legal
them.
entity. Well, I mean, and like, have you seen any issues of, let's say, a project getting their ADA and then they're kind of holding it, hoping that the ADA goes up a little bit, and then go into a bear market, and really affects the project planning because they did a project plan based on the value of the token at the time of issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I haven't found that. But also the thing is that outside of particular funding, you have the opportunity to also get access to human capital, to test out your ideas, to participate in your ideas, and as well as mentorship within the community. So I haven't really seen projects that have publicly communicated that receiving the ADA was problematic, and that they couldn't continue work because they couldn't liquidate the token.
Okay, thank you.
Question about the non-existent, let's say, entity behind it. This is what still makes me really curious. I mean, I can understand that it is put as experiment and there might be some legal definitions there to explain it, but still this also means that everyone taking the decision about how the funds are distributed and what happens with them is personally liable for taking this decision, or is it taken as, well, the community decided, so let's go sue 10,000 people because money went to Iran, for example? How does this work? It's just I'm failing to understand how it works.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like, even within your the Treasury itself isn't a legal entity, right? Cardano is a legal entity. So if funding was done, I mean, I think it's a little like, if funding was provided to Iran, it would be kind of problematic, of course, but these are also the skirts within these decentralized or autonomous organizations, right? And I think that the reason why they didn't make it a legal entity was for that particular reason, is that they wanted to provide a opportunity to fund community initiatives right away. And if they did develop a legal entity for it, they might have just stuck with having their funding partners, who are a legal organization, be the deciders for the distributions of funds. So I think that it's a, I don't know, a risk I guess they were willing to take.
Yeah, I know there's that case recently. I can't remember if it was the U.S. or not, but basically a Treasury DAO. I think it was more of an investment DAO, and people lost money, so they went after it. And one of the court so far, I don't know if it was finalized or what. I really don't know much on it, so I don't want to make too many blanket statements. But I believe because it was an illegal entity, they said then it is to be considered basically a straight basic partnership, due to the nature of the multiple persons of governance, which actually the article was kind of saying, had it been a limited liability framework, then the people taking part in governance wouldn't be held liable. But because there wasn't, then anyone that had voted with a governance token holds liability. Now, does that mean that they can actually follow through with that? I think it's still that legal gray area, but it's good to see people pushing the edges, especially for Cardano, because I guess where are they incorporated, the IOHK? I know Charles is in the US,
IOHK
but
is their funding partner, so it's not. So you know what? Let me find out.
but yeah, it's interesting to see these
But
DAOs
most likely
kind of
they won't be
come out of the
registered in the United States. Like my assumption would be like
right.
Switzerland or something.
Stay away.
Let's see. Oh wait. Let me get back to you on that one. It might just take a while
Sure.
for me to find it.
Sure, no problem.
I'll do that.
No, appreciate it.
Questions?
Very interesting stuff.
I think it's interesting. I think it also depends on the jurisdiction, right? So it's really hard. And there have been other cases, right, where not even just in crypto, in terms of like financial investment or businesses or where companies are particularly registered, one can try to sue them, but going after every single person who has a wallet that isn't identified by them individually, it will be a little bit difficult. So funny, they don't have their address here. Sorry about that. I don't actually know where they are registered. Any other questions?
Yeah, I noticed on one of your slides that they had like 900 applicants for, maybe it was just one of the rounds, but only 286 or something like that were actually approved, and perhaps some of those were still in the works. But compared to some of the other grant programs we've talked about, some of them are very freely giving away money. This one seems to be much more selective. Do you have any statistics kind of overall, if it's maybe 30% are approved or something like that?
It's not I don't have the exact number, but it isn't an astronomical amount. But like, you also have to keep in mind that they go through a pretty rigorous assessment to determine its like impact, feasibility, and auditability. And I think that in regards to the community, from what I've been watching on their YouTube, they're pretty detailed like researchers and like scientists. So I think that they see the projects, I don't know, maybe they assess it with much more concerning of an eye. But also I think that the amounts too are much larger than some of the grants that we had talked about before, right? And their impacts in terms of the challenges are quite technical in most cases, right? So accelerate decentralized identity and Cardano scaling solutions. This isn't like, I want to do a community sentiment for my DAO. So it's not necessarily apples to apples, I think is the saying. And that's probably why it's gone through a much more rigorous process. What I actually really appreciate about it is that it does a retrospective, after a challenge to determine whether or not that challenge was effective. So like KPIs would be like, how many developers had applied, how many people have engaged, how many reviewers have reviewed it, how many, community advisors had signed up. And then from that, they learn from it to make changes. And I think that by calling it an experiment allows that agility for them to, modify, talk about, discuss ways in which to make it better. Whereas I feel like in defining something as this like grant program, it depends on its success. And by calling it an experiment, because of the narrative, it allows much more free fall and learning approach to things and to change it as well.
Okay, thanks.
Got a question. Hi, Themes. This is Marco.
Hi, Marco.
Thanks to Punkart, I was introduced to Othello for the decision-making process, and that's the same information I introduced to the community as well. I'm wondering, we didn't touch this subject the Gitcoin presentation of last week, but I'm wondering if ADA is using any type of tool, AI, machine learning supported tool that would help with the actual proposal shaping and even grant decision making process.
So it doesn't rely on AI for that, but mostly collective intelligence around that. So the process, even in the idea scale, in which people are also incentivized to engage with, allows more of a stopgap to determine whether or not an idea is actually, fruitful. I think that Cardano's like stringent process within the community advisors, as well as providing them like communication collateral for like measurements, and then a stopgap with the veteran community advisors, will allow much more of a streamlined approach to things. But as of now, it's just human capital and human engagement, as well as using the idea scale and the mobile app to vote.
Great, thank you.
And just maybe to react on it, like from Gitcoin perspective, there is this quadratic funding technology, which will basically determine what projects will get funded more or less. I can share more material with you. I think that's also it's not AI per se, but I think it's cool technology which we can use.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. As a matter of fact, I shared also Poll.is, which is open source. Unfortunately, Othello, it's not open source yet, but it would be great if we could be introduced to any other means to actually be able to have a decision-making process that can help the community shape any ideas, so we don't waste any time.
Yeah, definitely. And if I will come around another tool which can support you, like the Attila or the Paul, I'll definitely let you know.
What I liked from this research and experience, I think, which is missing, is that they had clear communication as to each person's role, but also had the collateral for voters or proposers to actually submit things in order for their success. So it didn't just rely on collective engagement for this process. They also had, tools, resources, YouTube videos explaining the whole process, the whys. So what I liked about it is that there were a lot of resources to kind of help a person independent of whatever stages they're participating through the grant process.
Any generalized snafus or gotchas? I guess you could say, oh, I wish we had known about that. We could have prevented that early on. That kind of thing, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there has been a large discussion early on when I was looking at the documentation as to the role of the community advisors. So at first it wasn't proposers couldn't be community advisors. So those were things that were learned as well. There are obviously maybe inefficiencies in regarding to the ways that the community advisors or the veteran community advisors activities were done. And so that's why they developed that database to track their particular activities. And then I think that the incentives percentages as well were also kind of adjusted dependent on the engagement. And so every kind of session is a learning experience. And so they just apply different changes by doing retrospectives around that. But no, I haven't seen any large snafus, but I also cannot confirm that there weren't any.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Hi, this is Marcus. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the KPIs that they asked from the project, and I was wondering if there's a standard set of KPIs that they always ask from the project, and how often do they report them? And yeah.
Sure. So the KPIs are usually set by the people submitting the projects. They would have to submit their reports, I believe, every 2 weeks with their standard KPI in order for them to get the funding, as the funding is provided within increments. And then from that is shared within the community as well.
Okay, so it's up to the project, and depending on the goals of the project, which KPIs they are pursuing.
That is correct. But then also there is that stopgap of the community advisor role, who will then assess the impact, feasibility, and auditability of like whether or not this could actually be, implemented, and whether or not it actually fits the challenge criteria, and whether or not the impact is strong enough in order for it to get funding. So the community advisor role also, determines whether or not this is an actual legitimate and valuable project as well.
Okay, so if you you said that the funds are paid out in tranches, and depending on the progress of the project, is there also a lot of cases when they say, the project has failed and the rest, you can't get the rest of it? Does that happen very often?
The frequency of that I can't actually confirm, but they do have stopgaps specifically for that reason. If they felt that they were not receiving accurate reporting to ensure that the project was meeting its milestones, funding will stop.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
No, I mean, I had a pleasure actually learning about this. Like, I really love governance. And so looking at different experiments to engage community, especially access to community funding approaches, are really interesting to me. And actually, the only question would be is, I can include some of the resources on this particular grant, but I just wasn't sure who I would give it to in order for you to learn more.
Cheerio. All right, then. I'd say we can wrap it up for today. So thanks again, everyone, for participating. See you, what is it, next week? Chuck, can you confirm?
Actually, tomorrow. We wrap up the series tomorrow. Same time, same place. We will be presenting on optimism.
Perfect. Thank you very much for reminding me that. I'll put it in my schedule just to be sure. And then again, see you tomorrow for this last session about Optimus. And thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Talk to y'all tomorrow. Thanks a lot, Feems.
Thanks
Thanks, Munkar.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good day.